I have mentioned that there are two hurricanes that are equal to one another monetarily as the costliest of their kind in American history. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, now in its second year from the Weather Network in Canada. With that, we jump headlong into a hurricane so destructive that it is equaled only by that of Hurricane Katrina of '05. This is the story of Hurricane Harvey, the story that leveled the Lone Star State when it hammered Houston on this day in weather history. All right, so on the August 23rd podcast, we discussed the formation of Hurricane Katrina. And don't forget, on the 29th of this month, we pick up part 2 when it made landfall in Louisiana. Harvey was the 8th named storm, 3rd hurricane, and 1st major hurricane of the already extremely active 2017 Atlantic hurricane season. Developing initially from a tropical wave to the east of the Lesser Antilles, it assumed tropical storm status on August 17th. Harvey began to weaken as it headed out now into the Caribbean Sea and degenerated into a tropical wave north of the country of Colombia on the 19th. But Harvey was still under close observation for the likelihood that it could strengthen again. And that was the right plan. Moving across the Caribbean and the Yucatan Peninsula in southern Mexico, Harvey indeed did redevelop over the Bay of Campeche on August 23rd. Then really ramped it up on the 24th, regaining tropical storm status and becoming a hurricane later that day. On August 25th, 2017, this day in weather history, Hurricane Harvey continued north through the Gulf and delivered a devastating gut punch as a Category 4 hurricane that made landfall, striking Texas and Louisiana. It was the first major hurricane actually to make landfall in the United States since Wilma in 2005. Now remember, Wilma happened after Katrina in the alphabet, and yes, the fact that 2005 saw the letter W at all says all you need to know about how active that year was in weather history. Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider. But there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective. But oftentimes, they will include visuals from that day's event from when it happened in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. A particularly interesting fact that went unnoticed to many was that the U.S. coast had not had a classified major hurricane since then. That was a 12-year absence, a standing record. That in itself was incredible. But now, it was history. The impact of Harvey was intense. In a 4-day period, many areas received more than 40 inches of rain. That's 1,000 millimeters. Or, for those that experience heavy snowfall, that's 100 centimeters of rain. Lasting images include freeways filled up with water like swimming pools, all the way up to their high overhang signage. In the Texas town of Nederland, they took the record for rain totals when they recorded peak accumulations of 60.58 inches. That is 1,539 millimeters. Hurricane Harvey was quite definitely at least the wettest tropical cyclone on record in the United States. But was it the most expensive? And we're going to get to that. The massive and widespread floods drowned hundreds of thousands of homes, which displaced more than 30,000 people and prompted more than 17,000 rescues from cars on highways and rooftops in communities. As far as the cost, it is tied with 2005's Hurricane Katrina as the costliest tropical cyclone on record, ringing in at $125 billion in 2017 USD. But unlike Katrina, where most of that cost was attributed to the failing levee systems, Harvey's damage was primarily from the catastrophic rainfall-triggered flooding in the Houston metropolitan area and southeast Texas. This has been the story of the powerful and punishing Hurricane Harvey. It made landfall as a Category 4 storm on August 25th, 2017, this day in weather history. Hey, do you like the podcast? We'd love to hear from you. If you have an idea, go right now to wherever you're listening to me and rate us if you would, please. It's on a 5-star system, and we would love as many stars as you can afford. So rate us, but then also review us. This way we can always stay on top of how you'd like to see the show evolve. Then remember to subscribe to this podcast. Click the subscribe or follow button right there on the very same podcast homepage you're listening on. You'll be immediately reminded that the next day is ready to listen to, and you also have access to every episode in the archives. It dates back to June 1st of 2020, so there is a lot that we got to get caught up on this day in weather history. Hey, speaking of both baseball and the state of Texas, tomorrow is August 26th, and we're going to look back at a story that involves both. The 3 hottest games on record for Major League Baseball all occurred when the Texas Rangers were hosting. And the worst of it was when the visiting Toronto Blue Jays came to Arlington and the temperature was a nasty 109 degrees Fahrenheit or 43 degrees Celsius. This day in weather history with me, your host and big-time baseball fan, Chris May.